Welcome everyone to Monday Match Analysis Classics. I'm Gill Gross. Today's episode is a conversation with Joel Drucker on the 1976 US Open Final between Jimmy Connors and Bjorn Borg. Joel is probably the number one person in the universe I would want to have this conversation with, because this match plays a prominent role in his book. It takes up an entire chapter in Joel's book titled Jimmy Connors Saved My Life. And if you haven't read the book, you're probably familiar with Joel's work for tennis.com, where he is a writer. I enjoyed this conversation immensely. There's so many different angles to get into, from the rackets to the surface. Now, there was a power outage in the middle of our conversation. You may notice an edit right before we get into the third set tiebreak, but Joel was kind enough to bear with this power outage for about an hour and a half, and we were able to resume the conversation later. So my thank you for that, but I do think that you guys are going to enjoy this. Without further ado, Joel Drucker. We're joined for the first time by legendary tennis writer Joel Drucker. You can find his work at tennis.com, author of the book Jimmy Connors Saved My Life. Joel joins us from the West Coast. How are you doing?
I'm all right, Gill. How are you? It's great to be here.
Yeah, I had to bring you on for a Jimmy Connors match. There is no one better to talk about a Jimmy Connors match than yourself.
To talk about him.
So we're going to go over the 1976 US Open Final between Bjorn Borg and Jimmy Connors. Joel, this was kind of an interesting one because Connors has this dominant 74 season, and then in 75 he doesn't win one. And although he had a great year after not capturing any of the titles in the lead up to this 76 US Open, was there a lot of pressure on Jimmy to win a major title for the first time in a while?
Yes, there was. And I think to set the context a little further, you nailed it, Gill. He wins 3 majors in 74, the Australian, Wimbledon, the US. 75, he loses all 3 of those finals, that's a pretty good year, but losing all 3 of them is frustrating. And then I think what people should understand, though, about the flow of the tennis year then is that the first 2 majors of the year were not nearly as important to what the tennis season was about as they are now. So it's early 76. Connors wins a huge tournament, the Philadelphia Indoor Tournament, and he beats Borg on the way to winning that title. And that's a more important title than the Australian Open, but it's not a major. The French, Connors doesn't even play. Borg loses early. But again, the tennis year does not revolve around the Australian and French that much then. So the real alpha and omega of tournaments then were Wimbledon, the Open. And then that's where things start to maybe change a little, and that Borg wins Wimbledon for the first time in 76, surprising everybody because people thought, here's this clay courter. It's a little bit like Nadal when he first won Wimbledon. It's like, who's this guy as a clay courter winning Wimbledon? And Borg wins it. And even though at that point, I believe he was 1-5 with Connors coming to the US Open Final, or 1-6, something a little behind on it.
Yeah, 1-5.
1-5. He had lost to Connors at Palm Springs at a tournament that year. So Connors was still ranked ahead of Borg, but Borg had won Wimbledon. So the stage was really set. That's right. The stage was really set. Right. This match was going to determine who was number 1 in the year, regardless of computer or anything else. You're right. It very much was. And Connors liked that kind of pressure.
I want to talk about the popularity of the sport at this time before we get into this match, because Forest Hills is completely packed. Center court's completely packed. And the commentator, Pat Summerall with CBS, says that the attendance record for the tournament was broken by 34,000 people. That was the margin between 75 and 76, which is seemingly a massive jump. Was this kind of a popularity boom for tennis at this time? And if so, why so? Why?
The high watermark of the tennis boom was really happening right around this time. In 1970, it was estimated that there were about 10 million Americans who played tennis. By 76 or so, that number tripled. In 71, there was something like 7 tournaments on television. By 75, 76, there were 70. So the game through the 70s, and I know I started playing tennis around 1971, 72. So I'm very much a child of that period. And the game then, at one point, was the fourth most popular sport in the country, behind football, baseball, and basketball. So tennis in those years was just a supernova, was just rocketing. Why that happened, you can look at it from two different ways. One is what you call the top-down thing, which is the game went open in 68, and suddenly a great many people got to see what an interesting, captivating sport tennis was. And there happened to be some very compelling players playing too, who were even not Americans and players from other countries. You had Americans like Arthur Ashe, Billie Jean King, Chris Evert emerges, Connors starts to emerge. Then the great Australians were still playing, like Laver and Rosewall and John Newcomb, Ivan Goolagong. There's this Romanian guy, Elina Stasi, this Swedish guy, Borg. So the game was really blossoming. That's a little bit the top down, but there's also kind of the bottom up. You won't believe this, but 50, certainly 60 years ago, exercise wasn't considered that big a thing for masses of Americans. But sometime in the late 60s, there starts to emerge a little bit of this do your own thing, find your self-expression, and even things like the ecology movement, the environmental movement, start to say, wait, we've got to take care of our planet. We've got to take care of ourselves. And so there's this movement that becomes in the late 60s, early 70s, the fitness boom. That's where running becomes a big thing. And tennis is one of the first children of that time. So things are happening in the late 60s, early 70s that are making tennis go supersonic.
Yeah, that's fascinating. We've both mentioned Forest Hills by this point. That was the site of the U.S. Open at this time, on the west side of Manhattan, right?
No, the West Side Tennis Club is in Queens.
Oh, Queens, right. Okay,
West Side Tennis Club in Queens,
so that,
not too far from where the tournament is currently played at Flushing Meadows.
okay, but the surface was hard-true. So a green clay, which, I mean, I think a lot of tennis players are familiar with the surface, but we don't see it on tour anymore. How would you describe the surface of the 76 U.S. Open?
Well, let's keep in mind that it had been grass through the end of 1974. It had been played at grass. However, in order to make the game more even-handed for more players, not necessarily to help American players, but to actually it hurt a great many American players who'd been net rushers. The hard-true surface was similar to the clay at Roland Garros, but not quite as slow, a little more easy grippable. I mean, it's a common clay. It's very common on the East Coast. I'm sure you've played on it some. I played on it, not nearly as prevalent in the West Coast as in the East Coast. And it's a clay surface, but again, a little more firm and a little easier to get your feet under you than the European clay, which is a much slower, the famous red clay.
And that's a perfect thing to keep in mind when we talk about the play styles of Borg and Connors. I guess the contrast here is not as stark as some other matches that included Bjorn Borg or Jimmy Connors, because both of them were pretty comfortable hitting ground strokes in a time where there was a lot of serve volley, a lot of net rushing. Would you say that they were kind of contrasting baseliners? Borg, more of a counter puncher, relied more on his consistency, whereas Connors was more of your modern aggressive baseliner.
That's a very good characterization. It's interesting. These were the two best players in the world, and by far the two best baseliners. I mean, Connors was a good clay court player. I mean, he won the U.S. clay courts 4 times, including beating Borg in a final. He'd learned to play on clay. These guys were kind of changing the way the game was played. Just a few years earlier, the prevalent players were serve and volley players, and so they were each countering serve and volleys with their two-handed backhands. Connors with a fairly aggressive return on his service return to counter a net rusher. Connors was thought of as a counter puncher too, in contrast to a net rusher. Borg, more of a defensive player. You know, their matches usually revolved around Connors trying to control the forward part of the court in the semicircle inside the baseline, and Borg trying to control it from behind the court. So Borg, more of a defensive player, Connors seeking to initiate. And as you can tell from seeing the match, Connors is the one looking to kind of vector his way forward into the court and close off points. And Borg was pretty content to patrol the baseline incredibly fast. Bjorn Borg, maybe, I mean, at a certain stage, the fastest player in tennis and still one of the fastest ever.
Yeah, so let's get into the first set. That dynamic was very, very clear in the first set, because Connors was dictating play. And what it reminded me of, this first set, it reminded me of a boxing match where one fighter has a 10-inch reach advantage, because it seemed like Jimmy could hurt Bjorn from an area of the court where Bjorn just didn't have the power to beat Jimmy. So in other words, Connors was hitting these blistering flat backhands that really could do a lot of damage from the back of the court. Borg was really just hanging in, defending, using his great movement, but wasn't having tons of success in the first set. It was really Jimmy.
If you're scoring at his boxing, you're seeing Connors is the one scoring all the points. However tennis works, the judge doesn't give you points for deep ground strokes. The judge only gives you points for winning the point. So throughout that first set, it's the questions of how's Borg going to win this match, or only if Connors loses this match? Because basically Borg is just saying, okay. And Connors is just going boom, boom, boom. And Connors for this tournament had brought back into the fold his former coach, Pancho Segura, who very much wanted him to be more aggressive that way. Connors could sometimes get a little passive because he could usually, with his ground strokes, beat a great many players anyway. But Borg was so steady and so fast. So Connors knew he had to have a little bit more court position, a little more aggression, go after the ball. Yeah, really take it to Borg.
I thought hitting on the rise was really important for Connors in this set and throughout the match, because Borg had this very loopy ball with lots of net clearance, and it probably backed a lot of players up. But Connors, so comfortable hitting on the rise, especially on his backhand side, he could really step into the court and be aggressive on a ball that Borg was probably used to playing pretty safely.
That's right. And so Connors was constantly on Borg, pressing him, pounding on him. And Connors was very good at hitting the ball on the rise. And if you can hit the ball on the rise and hit it hard, because Connors was the hardest hitter in the game at that point. Mm-hmm. So if you can do both, you can really take away time from your opponent. And he did that quite well with Borg. And you could see that again and again in these rallies. And then Borg, if the ball was a little shorter than Borg wanted, Connors would get on it, and Connors was willing to come to net and stick his nose in there and make Borg try to pass him.
So how much of that was the racket that Jimmy Connors played with? Connors has, and I see it right by your left shoulder, an aluminum racket made by Wilson.
Yeah.
Borg used a wooden racket, so you had that contrast there.
It's funny, Gill, that you mentioned this. You're the second person I've talked to in the last week under the age of 30 who cites technology. And it's funny. It's neat. It's great, because I think, I didn't grow up with much technology. I grew up with minimal technology in my life. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have computers. But I think people younger, technology has been more a part of your lifestyle. So you want to invoke things like the racket. See, but it's not the racket it's not the technology that makes the playing style. It's the playing style that finds the racket. So Connors already knew how to play tennis like that. He started using this racket when he was 14 or 15, but he'd been playing for several years. So the technique, the concept was there. I think Connors could have just as soon played that way with a wood racket, stylistically, and hit the ball early. But the racket helped him feel that he could really wing the ball and zing the ball, and it gave him that what he felt was his confidence. But as far as the actual powerful qualities of the racket, as if it's like a car with more horsepower, I don't think that's it. It was more Connors' view of his game and the way his mother and grandmother taught him. I mean, I'll tell you a story about Connors and hitting the ball that way. And I'm pretty sure he wasn't quite, if he was using the T2000, the Wilson T2000, he was just barely starting to use it at this point, or maybe not even at all. Connors was at a tournament in North Carolina with a younger player from St. Louis named Trey Waltke. Trey, about 3 years younger than him. Trey was they're both very good juniors. And they go inside in this gym on a rainy day because there's no tennis happening. They go inside and they start hitting balls against the wall of the gym. And Trey Waltke was kind of a player in the Ken Rosewall Federer mode. He had touch and feel. And he's showing Connors these nice, shots. They're hitting them against the wall, these kind of finesse shots. Suddenly, from up in the stands of the gym, someone comes running down. And it's Connors' grandmother, Bertha, also known as Two Mom. And she grabs the racket out of Connors' hands and goes, "What are you doing? That's not how he hit the ball. This is how he hit the ball." And she hits the ball as hard as she can against the wall and short hops it, just takes a short hop shot, boom, boom. And she goes, that's what we do. She goes, any questions? I mean, so in a way, his gestalt towards how he went about playing was very much that way. I mean, he would have been doing that if he learns to play with a garbage can lid. You know, you take the ball, you go after it, you pound it.
Joel, at the end of the day, this was one of the earlier aluminum rackets. If the T2000 was this miracle potion, then everyone on tour would have been using it, but that wasn't really the case.
Many did initially. They tried it. You know, I always think of the T2000. It was kind of like socialism. It was an interesting, innovative idea. A great many people experimented with it, and then it proved a failure. I think a lot of players, Billie Jean King won Wimbledon with it, Ann Jones, Clark Graber, a number of players were using it. They couldn't control it. Not a very good racket. I mean, it's funny. I use this racket. This is not the exact one, but I had this racket when I was about 13. You couldn't really flip the ball. The flatness, you couldn't really hit topspin and control the ball too much. So you needed some of the technique that Connors had. He would have lead tape on one side of it, just one part of it, not all around. And it made it a little heavier, and he had it strung quite tight. And he felt, you know, to him, it was like King Arthur and the sword. And he could just take that racket back and felt very confident. But again, as you've seen, his strokes are very flat. Going over the net a little higher than people think. TV doesn't do his strokes justice. They were still going several feet over the net, but a lot closer to the net, a lot more line drive-like than Borg's parabola.
While we're there, how about the slice forehand? That's something that immediately stood out. Yeah, side spin on a lot.
More side spin than slice. More coming, the racket coming across the ball.
Yeah.
That down the line one. And I've talked to Connor's opponents about that. More coming across the ball than the slice than an underspin. You know, we think it wasn't so much that, it was more coming like that. And what he would do, he would use that to redirect the rally. Because players knew one area to get in on Connors was to hit the ball low and short with not much pace to his forehand. You could see from his stroke, it was hard for him to lift the ball and get as much power on that. And sometimes on approach shots, he would hit into the net. He didn't really lift it, particularly on these surfaces like grass or clay where the ball didn't bounce up much. So that would happen. And so what he would do, say, well, look, I'm tired of you slicing your backhand low to my forehand. I'm going to make you hit a forehand now. They would hit that side spin forehand, and it was still kind of deep, and it was still kind of low. And then his opponents, they would have the conundrum of, well, now what do I do? I've got my forehand. I got to hit it. If I hit a cross court, which is the natural shot, it goes right back to his backhand. But on the other hand, if I hit it down the line, unless I hit it deep, I'm hitting kind of short. And Connors was pretty comfortable against, as you saw, versus Borg against high forehand. So it was kind of a tactical play on Connors' way to redirect the flow of the rally.
I also noticed he could use it to chip and charge, which most players really only had on the backhand, but Connors could do it on both sides.
Well, you mean like a sidespin forehand approach in the middle of the rally, right? In the middle of as his approach shot. Right. That's a come in on the return. Yeah.
Yeah.
That shot goes back to that was a little bit of a shot. That was a shot used in the 40s. Jack Kramer, the right-hander, had that shot too, where you would kind of side spin the forehand into the backhand corner and then dare the person to come up with a good backhand passing shot. In Connor's case, being a lefty, he would hit it down the line or even sometimes cross court. Yeah, it's a little strange, isn't it? Like you're seeing him, he's kind of hitting it with side spin and it's going cross court, but it's low. Yeah, it was kind of an intriguing shot. Yeah.
Yeah, very different. I don't think it exists anymore, really, from anyone on the tour.
No.
Let's go.
Yeah, go on.
Let's go to the second set. I think that the one thing that I noticed was Borg trying to get into the cross court rallies on the ad side and really making Jimmy hit forehands. But for the most part, my assessment of the second set was that Borg played for the most part the same, but Connors' level dropped.
I couldn't agree with you more. That's exactly right. I think, Connors' confidence started in kind of a fever pitch. And so he was going to the high degree. And I think you're spot on. I think he got a little a little sloppy in the second set. Borg just kind of maintains this level. He's just humming along.
Mm-hmm.
And you see the whole match, you see so much of it is in Connor's hands, in his way. And yet Borg is steady, Borg is fast, Borg isn't going away, serving pretty good at times. And Borg is right in the middle then of revamping and making his serve better. So you're right. I think Connor's level of play dropped, and there you go. That's tennis for you, whether it's them or us. A little margin here and there, and there you go.
Borg was quite known for just staying absolutely the same all the time, right?
Yeah, this pulse of about 35. I mean, he just had this low grade hum to him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So again, Connor's, it's mostly errors. If you look at how Borg gained the upper hand in this set, if you look at the break, it was just one break in the second set, and Bjorn won it 6-4. Connor's really, he lost the confidence on the piercing backhands that he was hitting in the first set, and Borg took the second. In the third, suddenly we're getting like a million breaks of serve. No one can hold serve. And a part of me is almost like, well, it's about time, because the serve was almost a non-factor in the first two sets, yet they were holding.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting how that kind of goes. And they each were good return game players, because they each had good returns in different ways. And suddenly now the breaks happen, and the serves, it's interesting how the tennis seemed in that match. The serves are fairly negligible, aren't they? I mean, between the play and the way they each approach the game and the way they each approach points, neither was using the serve as much of a opportunity creator.
I think Connor's hit like 2 aces and Borg hit 1.
Yeah.
That's just from memory. I think when there are so few, you have a better chance at remembering.
Yeah, that's right. I think so. And there weren't that many service winners. And also neither is serve and volleying, so you don't have to worry about the net when returning. I mean, if I know you're never serving and volleying, I should never hit a return to the net.
Yeah. To me, maybe the shot that turned around the match was at 4-all.
4-all love 30?
Yeah, 4-all love 30. So Connors is serving, and he's in a big hole here.
If I may, just a sec. Shouldn't
Sure.
we go back a couple of games to Connors up 4-2, 40 love?
Yes, let's do that.
Connors in the third set was up 4-2, 40 love. And so it appears that he's got a stranglehold on the match. I mean, we all, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to know that the third set after you split the first two is pretty important. So Connor's up 4-2, 40 love, and he loses the game, and he hits forehands into the net, and he gets kind of, it's interesting how you see how even these great players, nerves and the situation, and next thing you know, Connors, who's pretty in control, he loses his serve, Borg holds, and now it's 4-all.
Yeah. And at 40-30, do you think that ball was going out? Because Connors took it out of the air very close to the baseline. And I do wonder if that ball was going out.
I think he just felt the need to play it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great point. It's a great point.
Okay. So basically,
now
I
it's
think
4-all love 30.
Yep. 4-all love 30. And the way we get there is Connors misses a mid-court forehand, and then Borg makes a really good forehand pass. At love 30, Connors hits a backhand cross-court approach, and Borg hits a really good passing shot, and Connors just comes up with this incredible stretch volley right in the corner on the forehand side for a winner.
It's fantastic, and it's interesting. First of all, I think the thing that's a little beguiling in that point is that Connors has a short ball to his backhand, and you're pretty much better off approaching down the line in tennis.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly if you're going to the guy's weakness, which is his backhand. Borg's forehand was better than his backhand. So why Connors opted to go cross-court with his backhand approach at that point is a bit of a mystery to me. And then he nearly paid the price for it, because Borg cracked that pass pretty well. And Connors, it's interesting. I want to inject now a little bit of my way to think about Jimmy Connors. The tendency is to think of him as he's a great competitor, and he's a grinder, and he's a hustler. He's Pete Rose, he's David Ferrer, he's Leighton Hewitt. But no, Connors was the wrecking crew of his day. He was the big shot maker. He was not a singles hitter. He was not a lifetime 305 hitter in tennis. He was a lifetime 340 hitter. So he would hit shots. he could hit big shots. And we'll talk as we get into the rest of the third set. We'll talk more about some of that. And so and then he could come up with the tennis equivalent of a 24-foot jumper, right? I mean, like that's a Steph Curry. Whoa, where'd that come from? And Arthur Ashe, who was broadcasting the match at the time, Connors doesn't even know how important that shot was. But the funny thing is, of course he did. 4-all love 30. He knew exactly how important it was.
Yeah, he basically goes on a tear, wins the next 3 points to hold at 40-30 for 5-4. And this third set ends up going into a tiebreak. One of the things I noticed throughout the set is at this point, every time there's a short ball, Jimmy's pretty much hitting an approach shot and coming straight to the net, which I think that was the main tactical adjustment from the first 2 sets, where in the first set, Connors was hitting so clean from the baseline, it didn't matter. In the second set, it was errors from Connors. In the third set, I thought there was a little bit more margin for Jimmy because he knew, well, I don't need to destroy the ball. Let me just hit an approach shot and come in.
I think you're right. I think maybe sometime he was thinking he had to hit bigger shots instead of approach shots. And so that got him a little off balance in that second set. And you're right. And then in the third set, he started to see more, okay, let's keep it deep. Let's keep it deep. Let's wait for our thing. And let's hit a quality approach shot. Like he did, like again, at that 4-all point, that 4-all love 30, it was a pretty deep approach shot, but it was, but at least he was the willingness to come in and hits the volley. And like here, I have the quote from Arthur Ashe. He said, Connors had no idea how crucial that point was. But of course he did. And I think coming to net proves to make a big difference. And so you want to get into the tiebreak?
Yeah, let's get into this tiebreak. I think early on, Connors makes 3 pretty crucial mistakes. There's a double fault in there. There's a missed forehand volley where he had the open court and he should have put it away. And then there's a drop volley that he went for, which was a really difficult shot to go for. He finds himself down 6-4, double set point in the third set. From that point on, he gets really, really brave.
Well, that is a really interesting phase in the whole life and career of Jimmy Connors. I mean, it's a set all. Having to play a guy like Borg when you're down 2-1 is really rough. Borg already then was building his reputation as an incredible 5-set player, and it's steady. And when a guy that steady is ahead of you, it's hard to be as forthright. So Connors, to his credit, really grabs a hold of things in that tiebreak, and he hits a number of terrific approach shots. Comes in, levels the tiebreak at 6-all, and then at 6-all, he does something he rarely ever did. He aced Borg. It's amazing. He aced him to his forehand. It's the lefty serve out in the deuce court, and he's just going nuts, and the crowd is going nuts, and it's a really compelling tiebreak. I mean, it's very dramatic, and they're each a little tight, and Borg seems impregnable. I mean, you wonder if he seems so steady and solid. So Connors hitting his forehand approach shot, which is his weaker side, is hitting some good depth on that. But again, he has a set point at Borg. He's up 7-6, but he goes for a forehand cross court approach, and he's long on it. He's overhit it, so it's 7-all. And I was 16 years old at the time when I was watching the tiebreak and watching that whole match and living and dying with Connors. Then it was extremely dramatic.
It was impeccable, and you're right. It was almost like Connors continuously got that short forehand approach, and he just kept going for it. A couple times he executed perfectly, and then a couple times he got tight and he missed. It all culminates at 9-all, which Joel, you watched Jimmy throughout his entire career. I have to think that this is one of the most memorable points there is.
I think this point is one of the most critical points of Connors' career, and we talk about that. I mean, Connors was on TV more than any other player in the early years of the tennis boom, so he kind of created the template of the player who's on TV the most. He was at one point in TV on 15 of the 16 highest tennis-rated tennis matches, all featured Connors. So he was, it's very dramatic for a lot of people who grew up then to see the whole Connors thing in full motion. And we talk a lot about the great points he played in 1991 versus Paul Harris at the US Open, where Connors is hitting 4 lobs and wins the point. And But that was later Connor's career. By then, Connor was 39 years old, and his resume was kind of cooked. It's like, well, Michael Jordan, if he doesn't make that shot against Russell in the 98 NBA Finals, he still won 5 titles. It's still pretty good for Michael Jordan. So it's more earlier in the career. And at this stage of Connor's career, his resume is a lot more at stake. There's a lot more at stake from. So they get this 9-all point, and they have this rally. You want to talk, Gill, about then what Connors comes to net, and then so what happens with Borg?
Well, Borg throws up, it's a lob, but it's not a very like high defensive lob. It's, it's almost a in-between shot. Regardless, it's an extraordinarily high volley for Connors that he nearly can't even reach. But I think he retreats a little bit with his footwork, takes a couple steps back, reaches as high as he can, and he makes this high volley just to keep the point alive. And he's on his way back to the baseline when he hits this shot, and he can't come back in. He just keeps going back. So suddenly you had Connors at the net after that forehand approach. Now we're back to a baseline rally. And in the end, you get this vintage Connors backhand, which was just a massive frozen rope cross court, and it was a clean winner.
That's exactly right. Connors retreats the baseline. At one point, he redirects the flow of the point by hitting that sidespin forehand down the line. Borg goes back cross court. They're in a little bit of a rally, kind of a little bit of a minuet back and forth. And Connors, per his training, per his grandmother, telling him, you just hit the ball. And it's a little bit one of the great lines I learned from a coach is the ball doesn't know what the score is. The ball doesn't know that you're playing the US Open final. The ball is just the ball. So it's there, you hit it. And that's, I think, one of the things that we so admire, I know I admire about great athletes, is if you've trained, if you've practiced, it's not necessarily going for it, it's what you own. I mean, it's just like Steph Curry, here's the 23-footer. Of course, I've practiced it. I'm shooting it. I got it. And so it's electrifying to see someone in that situation, 9-all in the third set tiebreak, just take this backhand and just torch it. Like you said, a frozen rope. Makes me think a little bit in the more recent times of the 2011 US Open, and when Novak Djokovic was down match point to Federer, and he just cracked that forehand for a winner. And Connors, that's got to be one of the most important shots of his career.
Yeah. It got him a set point at 10-9, and I think that point probably shook Borg a little bit, because it was the error that he makes on set point was a little bit uncharacteristic for me, at least in the scope of this match, because for some reason he has a backhand and he tries to redirect it down the line. It was a high risk, low reward shot, and he missed it wide.
Yeah, kind of a little sloppy. I think Borg, the air really went out of his balloon after losing his fourth set point on the at the 8-9, and then at 9-all, Connors hit this winner. And I think Borg was still at that stage feeling intimidated by Connors, that Connors could kind of press him. And then Borg, the energy flow, you could see Borg was just kind of down, and the shot, he wasn't trying it. It wasn't that big a backhand down the line. He just kind of rolled it. It was kind of late and kind of listless, kind of sloppy, kind of like, I mean, I can't speak for you, but kind of, I know that shot. I'm a recreational player. It looked kind of like a sloppy move, like, wait, you're a pro? What happened? And he just, and then that pretty much sealed the deal in some ways on that match.
Yeah, because Borg went away a little bit in the fourth set. In the beginning of the fourth set, I actually thought, okay, maybe Bjorn's just changing his tactics, because he plays a little bit more aggressively. He's hitting his backhand with more pace. That doesn't work very well against Connors. I think he liked the pace. But in reality, I don't think it was a change of tactics in an attempt to win the match. I think it was a change of tactics in an attempt to get the match over with.
I think so too. It sort of seemed that way. It seemed like Borg was just, all right, here's Jimmy. He's up 2-1. I don't know. It's just kind of not my day. And Borg then gets down in the fourth, though he hangs on a little longer than the Connors fan in me wanted to see. And I remember that at the time. And I remember when I've since watched that match, it's like Borg, he fought off a few match points.
Yeah, it got tense there with Connors trying to serve it out at 5-4. Borg hit a blistering backhand passing shot. on match point, which
Right.
if Borg got the break, you never know. We could be talking about that shot.
Right. I know. That's what's so amazing about tennis. So it's very tight. And finally, though, Connor's again approaching, hitting a that side spin kind of forehand, in this case, cross court,
Mm-hmm.
and coming in on it. And Borg kind of capitulated. He just kind of
Yeah. Yeah. So he has a backhand pass. And I think Borg was probably one of the better players at executing that low backhand pass cross court, right?
very much so. He had the whipping, dipping cross court backhand.
Right.
Yeah,
This one just hits the tape. It's close,
it's close.
right? I guess I went over the 84, or you know what? I think I'm thinking the 1980 Wimbledon Final. I think the cross court
Oh, the one where he
pass.
passes McEnroe. See, he whipped that one. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It was that shot, but he didn't make it.
Well, I think that Connor's approach on this one was a little deeper than the McEnroe first volley in 80. And I think the 1976 U.S. Open, the clay seemed to kind of mesmerize each player sometimes and get them a little slower. I think the 1980 Wimbledon final on the slick grass, I think the neat thing about Borg or any player on the grass, particularly then, was you see that shot, you got to hit it because you don't know if you're going to get a good bounce. You don't know if it's going to be that short again. And there was a certain type of high energy committed quality to the way guys play at Wimbledon on grass. There's a little different like that. There are times in watching that match at Forest Hills on the clay, for each of them that's kind of like mesmerized. They get a little slow and kind of, it's almost like the clay becomes the third player on the court, kind of pulling them down. And you see sometimes Connor sometimes hit some of these forehands off his back foot, kind of high, Borg, kind of quasi moonball-y.
So there's the triumph for Connors. What did that win mean in the long run? How do you remember that win? Was it about just the accomplishment in itself, winning the U.S. Open? Was it about the Borg rivalry? How do you look back on that win?
Well, it's interesting with Connors, and maybe this is true for a lot of players, but I think when I think of Connors' career, it's the win in itself, which is always good, and then there's kind of where it fits into the tail. And this is a redemptive win for Connors. This is him proving, look, I had that great year in 74. I lost 3 finals in 75. Baby, I'm back. Don't count me out ever. And this guy from Sweden, yeah, he won Wimbledon, but it's the U.S. Open. And what's important, and the U.S. Open was quite significant then as sort of the showdown meaning tournament of the year. Wimbledon was very important too, but there was also a sense, well, Wimbledon's on grass and the bounces are kind of erratic. And the U.S. Open was coming up as a significant tournament. There were a lot of American players, the time of the year. So I think, and also Connors, he'd beaten Borg on clay the year before in the semis, but he beat Borg again on clay. And it kind of reminded him, hey, I'm number one. It kind of reminded the world that Jimmy Connors was number one in the world. That proved emphatically he was 3-0 versus Borg that year. Borg hadn't quite ascended to grand super status. He pretty much close there, but not quite. And Connors said, I'm still the guy. And so that meant a lot for Connors.
2 years later, we get a rematch. It's Borg and Connors again in the 88.
78.
In the 78 U.S. Open final. And this one, Connors wins again, even more decisively. But it's interesting, if you look at Bjorn Borg's career, it's almost insane to me how you win that many French Opens, that many Wimbledons, but he never wins a U.S. Open.
It is amazing. And also, of course, when you go to 78, and this is the thing with Connors, and he has, as you see, has these every other year slams, 74, 76, 78, and then later in 82. But a lot happens in the Connors-Borg rivalry between that 76 U.S. Open and 78. Borg earned several wins over Connors, including a significant win at the Pepsi Grand Slam, this 4-man tournament, which seemed like an exhibition, but it really wasn't. And Borg beat Connors on clay there in January 77. And that set the tone for Borg, then beating Connors in the 77 Wimbledon final, 6-4 in the 5th, and then drubbing him in the 78 Wimbledon final. And by this stage, by the summer of 78, Borg, it is there. He has won Wimbledon now 3 straight times. He's won the French 3 times. So, and in 78, he did the French Wimbledon double for the first time. So Borg has got it going, and he appears by this time to have displaced Connors as the man. And so Connors has a lot, even more of redemptive quality to him at that 78 Open. At the 78 Wimbledon is when he loses. He gets killed by Borg at Wimbledon. He makes the famous comment, says, I'm going to follow that guy to the ends of the earth. and he kind of showed, I'm going to chase that Borg. But that 78 Open, you got McEnroe, who's 19 and had already been to the semis of Wimbledon. He's starting to make his move forward as the next great American. There'd been a very in-depth article about Connors in Sports Illustrated just before the 78 US Open called Raised by Women to Conquer Men. And it kind of explored the whole psychology of Connors and his mother as the coach and his family. And also pointed out that Connors had lost 6 of the last 7 slam finals he'd played. I believe that was the total at that point. And so it was Connors meant to be kind of a runner-up. So the 78 US Open was a whole very important for him. And so him to beat Borg and earn that kind of win, very, very powerful.
And after the 78 Open, is that when Connors said, I don't know if you love me, but yes, I love you?
That's when Connors, the other thing with Connors in the US Open, 1976, the crowd wasn't entirely for Connors. Connors was still kind of the punk. 1977, it was even worse. In the semis, he was playing a match versus an Italian, Corrado Berezzuti, and Connors hits a ball, a backhand inside out, and it's called in, but Berezzuti looks at the line, and he's staring at it, and he's about to ask the umpire to come down. Connors runs across the court, erases the mark. Completely rude. And the crowd boos, and the next day the crowd is not particularly for Connors, and he loses the 77 Forest Hills US Open final to Guillermo Vilas, and it ends in like a soccer-style ending, just a wild ending, and Connors is so distraught by that, he almost punches out a photographer. He leaves Forest Hill, he goes right from the court to the locker to the car. No award ceremony for Connors. So Connors is like, still thought it was a punk, and then in 78, they move to Flushing Meadows, the new venue, the public park kind of venue with the hard courts. And when Connors wins the US Open, he says, whether you like me or not, I sure like you. I like you.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing it, but I
right,
like you.
Right.
And,
well, if anyone wants a more detailed written account of that, I'll put a link to the New York Times article you wrote in the comment section of this video. I think it's titled Jimmy Connors at the U.S. Open, First Hate, Then Love.
That's right. And then I write about it here. I made this is my book about Connors, but that's right. And then from 78 on, he had them in his pocket. They never rooted against him. And also he was the old guy by then, because here comes McEnroe. McEnroe's the next one. So 78, that changes Connors in the U.S. Open.
The big difference, if you're looking at, and this sticks out like a sore thumb, if you're looking at Borg's career and Connors' career, is that Borg calls it quits at 26 years old, and Connors calls it quits at 39.
More, almost 40. Now, also, it's funny that you mentioned sore thumb, because to go back to the 78 final, Borg had a blister on his thumb that year that kept him from playing.
I meant to do that.
Oh, you did? Thank you.
No, I'm joking. I'm joking.
I kept him from playing as well as he could have, and I hate to admit that, because it was tough for both players. Borg being injured, Connors wanting to win. Maybe Connors would have beaten him anyway. So there you have it. And Connors, though, that 78 Open, I should have added also that earlier in 78, Connors played the year-ending Masters in New York, and even then the crowd was starting to root for him. He kind of personified what New York was going through. New York was in a tough time then, and Connors was like New York fighting their way back. So then, I think your point about Borg in the US Open, he reached 4 finals there. He lost 2 to Connors, 2 to McEnroe, and he never quite got comfortable there. The clay years, Connors was still a little better than him. And then by the hard court, along comes McEnroe. And I think Borg, he wasn't comfortable playing at night, the fast surface. McEnroe had a great game for being Borg, and then Borg loses the 81 final, and he skips out on the award ceremony. So it was a tough tournament for Borg.
Why do you think he burnt out so quickly? And I wonder, because we just, enjoyed this documentary about Michael Jordan where he went out on top. He was winning championships. He was elite. I wonder if some of the same mental dynamic took place with both players, where they were so ultra competitive and obsessive that it was kind of exhausting for them to play at the top of their game.
See, I think Jordan was more like Connors, and I think Borg, I don't know quite who Borg was like, but I think Borg was world weary by the time he was 26. I think, first of all, his game, as you see in that 76 final, his whole career is based on a lot of attrition. There wasn't a lot of variety to Borg's game. He diversified. In fact, by the time he's winning Wimbledon, even 78, he's coming up to net a little bit more. He's slicing the backhand some. But at heart, his game, he's pretty much locked into a certain business model of his game, of how he was going to play with the topspin and the aggression. He also had played a lot. He turned pro when he was 15 or 16. I forget when he actually turned pro, but I just mean he was out there a lot. He did a lot of exhibitions, a lot of endorsements, and I don't think Borg had quite the hunger to compete. And so you look at the end of 81, and here's McEnroe, who's taken over from him at the top. Here's Connors, who challenged Borg severely at the 81 Wimbledon, losing 6-4 in the fifth after being up 2-0. And so Borg's saying, oh, Connors isn't going away, even though Borg had pretty much solved him by then. Then there's this guy, Lendl, who had beaten Borg. And I think Borg just got tired of the whole tennis thing. I don't think he had the ravenous appetite for competition that people like Michael Jordan and Jimmy Connors had. Whereas I think Connors' game had a lot more diversity to it. He had a lot more engagement in competition. I think he relished the chance to keep proving it and competing and playing. And I think Borg, it was all a little too much. He put in so much work to be that good, and now he was number 2. And there was still some of that vibe about, oh, go out on top. See, I think, and even Michael Jordan admitted in the documentary, Michael Jordan wanted to play more. And as you recall, he did come back and play more. He came back and played for Washington. So I think that going out on top is a storybook notion, but I think all the athletes I've come to know, it's like, I'm going to go out drooling. I'm going to go out to the last drop and play as much as I can. And if I'm not doing as well, if I'm hurting the team will let me know. In tennis, the marketplace will let me know. I'll be losing matches and going down in the ranks. But I just think Borg, I don't think he had I think he was just weary of the whole tennis thing.
We've covered 1,000 angles, and this has been so much fun to go over this match and the broader context. So I thank you for coming on, and we'll certainly do it again.
Great stuff, Gill. Really enjoyed talking with you. Thank you.